The wrestling pay-per-view realm got a little more crowded in 1997 when ascending indie ECW squeezed its way into the national fold. Not only that, but WCW fully expanded its output to one a month, with the addition of a certain January card that this video will most certainly be talking about. While 1997 featured largely strong soirees like Canadian Stampede, Halloween Havoc, and Barely Legal, most of the events from that year were pretty mediocre, and a select bunch were much worse. So throw on some baggy jeans, grab your chain wallet, and settle in for another semi-charmed list. Because while pro wrestling set the foundation for an impending national craze, they produced some pretty lousy shows en route. I'm Sam Driver from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 worst wrestling pay-per-views of 1997. Join us! Number 10, WCW World War III. Really, this was World War III 3, as it was the third incarnation of WCW's tedious 60-man battle royal for a future world title shot. For this one, the over-the-top rule was amended to allow for elimination by any sort of ring exit, even getting pushed under the ropes. Just as riveting were world champion Hollywood Hogan's late match entrance, eliminating himself when a 7-foot Sting interfered and helped Scott Hall win. The announcers were the only ones who didn't immediately pick up on Big Sexy Sting's uncharacteristic height. The undercard wasn't as mind-bogglingly terrible, though it wasn't great by any means. The best match was the Rey Mysterio-Eddie Guerrero rematch for the WCW Cruiserweight belt, which couldn't equal the sheer brilliance of the Halloween Havoc clash a month prior. Steve McMichael versus Alex Wright, Perry Saturn versus Disco Inferno, the Steiners versus Dave Taylor and a physically addled Lord Steven Regal. It felt like a glorified Nitro before the grand finale, or rather, the bland finale. Number 9, WWF Bad Blood. Obviously, the main event is beyond criticism. Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker cut the ribbon on Hell in a Cell matches in grand fashion, delivering what may still be the best cell match in WWE history, punctuated by the well-executed debut of Undertaker's evil brother Kane. Everything about that match hit the bullseye, but up until then, Bad Blood was simply no bueno, a supercard that was hardly super and bailed out by its main event. Admittedly, there was a pall over the proceedings, as scheduled participant Brian Pillman was found dead earlier that afternoon. He was intended to be part of a 2-match parlay with Dude Love and arch nemesis Goldust, and all surviving parties were understandably pulled. Matches that did take place, like Owen Hart winning the vacant IC belt, and the Bret Hart and British Bulldog versus Vader and Patriot flag match, were wholly underwhelming, while the Godwins versus Headbangers and LOD versus The Nation were just plain bad. If not for the cell match, Bad Blood would be remembered far less fondly, if at all. Number 8, WWF King of the Ring. For years between tournaments, fans clamored for the return of WWE's June Spectacular. There was just something fun about a one-night tournament to award a superficial honorific to an ascending star. Often forgotten is that aside from Bret Hart's 1993 trek to the Crown, the tournament has usually been an underwhelming endeavor. Take 1997, for instance, where the semi-finals were a horrid Triple H Ahmed Johnson outing and a mediocre Mankind Jerry Lawler battle. The final, where Helmsley earned the crown, was better, but not in the league of the Hunter Foley matches of future days. The only true good match of the night was a fierce face versus face battle between Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels. Aside from that lawless brawl, we're talking a boring Undertaker versus Farouk world title match, Goldust versus Crush, we would have got Shawn versus Bret if not for the Hitman still ailing from knee surgery. The two did face off the next day in the locker room, with Bret pummeling Shawn so badly that HBK briefly quit the WWF. Number 7, WWF Cold Day in Hell. It may seem like we're picking on the WWF quite a bit with this list, but honestly, we're not. It's just that the WWF was in a weird transitional time where some pretty good stuff was rising to the top, but the mid-card downward ranged between flavorless and downright pungent. Take May's Cold Day in Hell, where a strong twin bill closed the 2-hour card. Undertaker and Stone Cold for the WWF Championship, and a quasi-MMA slugfest between Vader and Ken Shamrock. While those matches were good, not great, the 3 that preceded it illustrate the WWF's state of being in 1997. Ahmed Johnson had to run a 14-minute nation gauntlet, and his individual fights with Crush, Savio Vega, and Farouk weren't exactly breaking the asterisk key. Mankind versus Rocky Maivia would mean a lot more in 18 months' time, but the throwaway version was just that. Throwaway. Open with not yet Triple H facing Flash Funk in a lifeless slog, and you notice the WWF 1997 pattern. Sheer banality needing a bailout from talented main eventers. Number 6. ECW November to Remember. ECW's 3 offerings in 1997 demonstrate a downward slide. Barely Legal in April was a smash hit at the time. August's Hardcore Heaven was a mostly good show, albeit one hampered by cruddy production and a lack of first try oomph. And then there was November to Remember, which really underlined just how not ready for primetime much of the roster was. The event did draw 4,600 fans to Pittsburgh, home of the world title challenger Shane Douglas, and while the franchise did win the belt back, it was in a 25-minute snoozer against Bam Bam Bigelow, where Douglas got only a modicum of offense in. It was still better than Sabu and Sandman's legendarily botch-filled tables and ladders match. A match like the 4-way tag title bout further demonstrated why ECW benefited from heavy editing on its TV programs, as Paul Heyman struggled to fill 3-hour pay-per-views with wall-to-wall watchable action. Number 5. WWF Survivor Series. So, you might have heard about this one before. Ignoring for a moment the historically infamous ending to the show, one that's produced enough conspiracy fodder to send Alex Jones into a permanent frothing fit, there's the fact that the 1997 Survivor Series was just plain bad. At a time when the WWF roster was wholly lackluster, they attempted 4 elimination matches, culling from the weak mid-card. Not a good idea. How does 10 minutes of DOA versus the Truth Commission strike you? Or 15 minutes of an 8-man featuring 4 tag teams, the most technically proficient being the New Age Outlaws? The fact that Team Canada only had 1 Canadian was one of the show's smaller problems. You'd think that Steve Austin versus Owen Hart for the IC title would be good, but Stone Cold's matches were still being kept short because of his neck surgery, so that only went for 4 minutes. Admittedly, Brett vs. Shawn was fantastic before you know what happened, but the show was terrible before then, and the lore and debate surrounding the ending doesn't really change that. Number 4. WCW Road Wild. Eric Bischoff's vanity cards at the Sturgis Biker Rally were never really any good, and 1997 was no exception. Coming on the heels of an all-time Nitro ending where Lex Luger ended Hollywood Hogan's year-long reign as WCW World Champion, you knew Hogan was getting the belt back in front of a freebie crowd that recognized him, but probably none of the other wrestlers. And that's what happened, and predictably the match sucked ass. Even matches that looked kinda good, like Ric Flair vs. Syxx, Chris Jericho vs. Alex Wright, and Conan vs. Rey Mysterio in the charmingly named Mexican Death Match, all capped out at decent or passable, sort of akin to house show good. The Steiners vs. the Outsiders and Randy Savage vs. the Giant were the sort of warmed-over WCW vs. NWO collisions that the wrestlers learned they could sleepwalk through for the same amount of money. While the Road Wilds did provide a unique aesthetic, they weren't florid enough to justify the half-assed wrestling shows that WCW provided, like this one. Number 3. NWO Sold Out. To put over the New World Order's power and potency, WCW had the Rebels stage their own anti-pay-per-view, and boy did they succeed on that front. So anti it was that the NWO contingent arrived on garbage trucks driven through Iowa in the dead of winter. Hell of a presentation choice that set the stage for the sheer oddness ahead. Oddness that included an unseen ring announcer mocking WCW's representatives, including calling Eddie Guerrero a Mexican jumping bean. The novelty, such as it was, of the stark anti-glitzy NWO theming wore off quickly enough, yet it persisted for the entire 3-hour runtime. Soundtracked by truly bad commentary from NWO boosters Eric Bischoff and Ted DiBiase, the matches were uniformly terrible, with the exception of Guerrero's US title ladder match against Syxx. Hogan and Giant's world title closer was atrocious, while matches like Jeff Jarrett vs. Michael Wall Street and Scott Norton vs. DDP proved why the NWO didn't need its own pay-per-view, nor did they need involvement in every single match. Points for trying something different, I guess, but the thudding faceplant hardly seemed worth it. Number 2. WWF D-Generation X. In WWE, December pay-per-views sometimes have a let's just get this over with feeling, before recharging over the holidays and coming back fresh for Rumble season. The December in Your House was a fine example of the throw some crap at the wall and see what sticks mentality, as this was a card that was more half-baked than your auntie's homemade fruitcake. And judging by reactions to the show, it was just as tasty. The lone good part was Stone Cold's brief IC title encounter with The Rock, which was sheer mayhem for its short duration, owing to Austin still easing back from neck surgery. Aside from that fun respite, how's about a Butterbean Mark Mero boxing match? Or Triple H and Sergeant Slaughter in a slow-motion boot camp match? Or an even slower Outlaws vs. LOD tag title match? Ostensibly good matches, like Michaels and Shamrock's WWF title bout and the light heavyweight title tournament final, were merely average. Average on a show lacking a truly great match. An up and down 1997 for the WWF ended with a resounding thud. And number 1, WCW Starcade. Here she is, kids. The show that absolutely bollocksed everything up. All they had to do was put returning hero Sting over the evil Hollywood Hogan in grand fashion to cap off a magnificent year. Alas, they couldn't even do that right. Hogan's selfish meddling caused Sting to look like an absolute fool via a botched false finish. Even the restart and subsequent correct finish didn't fully sit right. The triumph still felt like trash. Not that Starcade was motoring toward greatness before then. Retired Larry Zbyszko versus non-wrestler Eric Bischoff, with Bret Hart as barely interested referee, was as putrid as you'd expect. Goldberg versus Steve McMichael sucked. Lex Luger versus Buff Bagwell was also terrible. There were so many heel victories in the first 2 hours, restraining the catharsis, that WCW really needed to stick the landing in the main event with aplomb. But they did not. Starcade was a night of ego trips and misfires, setting the stage for the hell that WCW would experience in the coming years. And it's certainly 1997's worst wrestling pay-per-view.